This is me, Krys Pettit, the practicing artist. Join me in the studio and let's take a look at the good, the bad, and the things in progress from 2024. This is a small oil painting. It's about 8 inches high and 10 inches wide of some wisteria blooming in St. Simon's Island that I took a photograph of when I was taking an art course there some years ago. Didn't come out the way I wanted to, but I found a couple of little things with it that I really enjoyed. The branches, the twigs, the wisteria. It's a little questionable, but I'll take it. Another oil, a small one, 8 by 10, of a local view of where we go hiking on the shores of Lake Lanier in Don Carter State Park. It's a beautiful area, and at this time the water levels were a little low, as you can see, but autumn was just starting to peek through. Another view of Lake Lanier, again from Don Carter State Park in Gainesville, Georgia, and autumn is starting to get into the end of summer around here sometimes, and it makes for a colorful contrast of the greens and the warm colors of the trees as they start turning into real deep fall leaves. I know you're supposed to sketch, and I don't like it. I'm lazy, but I figured, what the heck, let's get some sketching skills going here. So I got a book and started copying some lessons from some of the old masters in sketching. To you, this may be a foot. To me, it was difficult. Again, trying to do more sketching. My weakness is human anatomy, so I started doing detail drawings of things like feet. Not fun, but a good exercise. I've been told that you should copy the masters, so I decided to do that, beginning with a pencil sketch. Human anatomy is a challenge for me, but I was fairly pleased with the way this rear view came out. You can see my original source that I did the sketching from, and I decided to take my skills a little bit further and actually do a quick watercolor of the sketch from the masters that I had copied. It's not exact, it's not perfect, but I was fairly pleased with the skin tones and the values that I managed to get. I teach my class, do more value studies, do more sketches before you start painting, in watercolor especially. So I figured I better practice what I preach and did a value sketch of this little slave cottage in St. Simon's Island, preparing for a watercolor study of the same piece. From that sketch and the reference photograph, I did this 9 by 12 watercolor on crescent illustration board. Little different substrate for me than the usual paper, but I was pleased with the look that I got out of it and pleased with the fact that I was able to refer to my value study, and it really helped make a much better watercolor painting. I really enjoy painting historic buildings, and this particular one is based on a photograph of a closed-off building on Hardman Farms, a Georgia State Historic Site outside of Gainesville, Georgia, up in the mountains. And I loved the way the light hit the rock that was blocking the doorway and the bright colors of that rock, and the very quiet feel that I got out of that closed-off area. I teach classes, and one of the classes that I'm preparing to teach is using experimental surfaces in watercolor. and this is a watercolor on canvas that is designed for watercolor, and I like the way it looks and the viscosity of the paint on the canvas and the texture that you get. So it's always good to experiment with different surfaces. Doing that very important step of a study before I start painting, from a photograph a friend shared with me of a wine tasting in Portugal. And sometimes I like the studies better than the finished product because I tend to be looser and freer with the studies. But I thought this was just a good way to start a larger painting. Here's the final painting. It is 15 inches high and 22 inches wide, based on that study you just saw of these three gentlemen at a wine tasting in a Portuguese winery, and I'm pretty pleased with how it came out, and I think the strength of it is based on the fact that I did a study and really learned my subject matter. I always like to go to farmers markets wherever I travel. This one was in Montreal, Canada, and the selections of jams and jellies was amazing, but I really liked the color of the fruit in front of the woman shopping, and especially that pink scarf she wore. I like going to farmers markets. It's a good place to get a lot of reference material if you're an artist. Another market, not exactly a farmer's market. This is a meat market in downtown Athens, Greece. And it's half of it is a meat market, half of it is a fish market. And I snapped this photo many years ago of these two people working there. And to me, it looks like they were maybe in a relationship, but it's just an odd juxtaposition of these two folks with an iPhone in front of all this meat that they're cutting. I actually did enjoy doing that raw meat by just laying in color and water and letting the colors blend. It's a slightly different subject matter. I was honored, proud, and delighted to be accepted in a statewide juried competition in Georgia for the Georgia Watercolor Society member show in 2024. And this is the painting that got in. I submitted 3 paintings, and this particular horn player in New York City got me a spot in that juried competition. It's a big milestone for my watercolor career. I work primarily with watercolor, but I also do work with oil, and one of my favorite subject matters are the trees, usually in areas that I have visited. This particular tree was inspired by visits to coastal Georgia, the live oak trees on the coast with the Spanish moss. It's a romantic, mysterious look, and in spring you have tons of blossoms of azaleas and other flowers that are blooming. It's a beautiful juxtaposition of the renewal of spring with a tree that has possibly stood there for hundreds of years. This could be any street scene in any old town, but it's inspired by my many visits to St. Augustine, Florida, and is a watercolor of one of the side streets in St. Augustine. So much history in that particular town, and you can really get a feel for it and take yourself back centuries when there are no cars and just these buildings on the side streets. That same watercolor inspired this oil of the painting of a side street in St. Augustine, Florida. I'm starting to do watercolors and then oils based on the watercolors, interpreting my subject matter in just a little bit of a different way. By the way, the original watercolor of this actually sold in Atlanta. Again, playing around with some oils of a reference photo I took at the Cornell Botanic Gardens in Ithaca, New York, where I used to live, and these poppies really grabbed my attention against that stone wall. It's a work in progress. I tend to do the oils, leave them in progress, sometimes going back to them several months later. I've been intimidated by oil painting for a very long time, and I pushed myself to do a rather large piece. I think this is 22 by 30 inches, the canvas size, based on my visits to the Southwest, to Arizona canyons, to New Mexico. It's a compilation of things that are really not what I would call geographically or historically accurate, but it sets the feeling and the mood of the ancient people that used to live in the canyons of the Southwest. During COVID, when we were locked down, I did watercolors of tools that we had in the basement. We were doing some work around our home, and I set up these still lifes, and I took photographs of them and just started painting the tools. It's unusual subject matter, I have to agree, but it catches the attention sometimes of judges when I enter exhibits. And it's an old hammer and some rusty nails that my husband had, an old piece of wood. I think that's a wood chisel there, but I find different subject matter can really get my watercolor skills more in motion and challenge myself with something other than the usual landscape or floral. Doing watercolor, preparing the proper way, as I tell my students and as I should do, is I did a thumbnail sketch of a painting of a house on Jekyll Island in Georgia on the coast, of an old house called the Horton House from the 1700s, an original tabby house. So how did I work on this first? I did that required pencil sketch. After the pencil sketch, I did a watercolor study of the same Horton House, tabby house on Jekyll Island, and I wanted to see what kind of colors would work for me based on the photograph that I took. Now, sometimes these studies do not always turn out to be the final painting. They're an idea of colors and palettes that I want to use. And here is the final painting of the historic tabby house, the Horton House on Jekyll Island, Georgia. And it doesn't look exactly like that watercolor study because I did a more realistic drawing of it, but I used a lot of the color suggestions I gave myself for painting this. And I especially like the mold, I call it mold, the patina on the house, the shadows that the trees throw on there. This is one of the more fun things to do when I do historic buildings. Not everything is a big painting. Sometimes these little 9 by 12 paintings are a lot of fun, like this scene based on a hike I took, and the reference photo was taken looking out on Mount Yonah in the Appalachian Mountains in Gainesville, Georgia. And the finished painting shows the purple of the mountains in the distance and those bright colors in the foreground. It was fall. It was gorgeous, and the hike took you to this overlook where you could just see miles out in front of you. It's always great to work from your own photographs because you get the feel of where you were, and that is in your memory as you start painting. Quick painting, experimenting on Yupo, not a sponsor. Acrylic paper, it's plastic. The paint sits on it. There's nothing you can do with it except manipulate the paint and the water. It's a challenge, and I'm going to be teaching a course on this later on in 2025. I think people will find it interesting. teach a number of classes at the local art association here in Gainesville, Georgia, and sometimes private classes. And this was prepping for a class on teaching people how to use just 3 colors when they use watercolor: alizarin crimson, lemon yellow, and ultramarine blue. And you can mix those colors to do pretty much any color in the world. It's fun because you don't have to worry about using a lot of different supplies and a lot of different colors in your palette. Quick, easy, and simple. Now we're getting into prepping for the holiday season, and I always try to do a watercolor for a holiday greeting gift card, and this was one that really appealed to me. We haven't gotten a lot of snow here, so it was based on photographs and my memory of times upstate New York primarily where we had heavy snows in the winter, and the purple shadows that the trees cast and the snow resting on evergreen trees in the background. Sunset and winter skies, end of day, has always appealed to me. The brilliant oranges and reds and the purple skies and reflectance of those colors on the snow. It's a simple scene, country scene, maybe a farmhouse somewhere. I do love those reflecting colors in winter. I usually take a lot of time to paint. I decided to take about 30 minutes to do a number of small paintings and try some new watercolor combinations that I can use later. I consider these studies. Again, trying to keep things a little simpler, using new colors, a simple watercolor of fall in the mountains. Maybe here, maybe in the Rocky Mountain area, kind of having Colorado on my mind. So maybe this is something that's a prediction of where I might go next year. I used to paint in very bright colors when I lived in Florida, and I've kind of turned to a more reserved and subdued color palette, and I enjoy the different things that you can get with mixing blues and purples and greens and browns on these very quick watercolor studies. Hopefully they'll turn into some larger paintings down the road. Lot of paintings, and not all of them are framed, so I decided to start experimenting with different kinds of frames. And I was really surprised how this really black frame made that beautiful tree painting pop. And then I started looking at an old abstract I did, and I wasn't pleased with it, but I found this very modern frame really made it stand out and made it something more special. It's the last painting of the year. It turned out to be a watercolor of some poppies that I saw again at the Cornell Botanic Gardens many years ago, and I really liked the way it came out. And I try to keep my watercolors diffused, letting the colors blend into the work. I always admired Monet, and I like to keep him in mind when I do florals. To me, his floral impressionistic paintings are a great inspiration. I think I ended 2024 with a very fun and lovely painting, and I hope that my next year will be as productive as this year. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate your support, your likes, your comments, and remember, if you want to learn a little bit more about the painting process in watercolor, you can join me on Patreon. You'll find the link in my descriptions. Thanks again. Have a great year, and wishing you a whole lot of creativity in the upcoming 2025.